What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Stonefield Ranch channel, where we talk horsemanship, ranching, Western lifestyle, the whole deal. This episode is kind of a state of the union of the horse cattle market. We'll talk a little bit about ranch ground and land and what that's looking like coming up in the year. Last year, we just kind of did a horse forecast. There were some things that we got right. There were some things that we got wrong. What we got right was there was a little bit of a drop in kind of your lower end ranch horse market. You saw that across like the Billings livestock auction. I think you saw that across like some of the salmon sales and stuff where, maybe that average lower end ranch horse that was 10, 15, 20,000. We were seeing more like 6, 8, 10, 12,000 for those kind of similar ranch horses. Didn't see a whole lot of dip in the really high-end stuff going through Western Bloodstock, NCHA, NRCHA stuff still holding really strong. I think that's a different buyer, different market. So anyways, we'll get into all that, but I got Landon Peterson with us today to kind of talk about State of the Union with cattle. Been a good year.
It's been a dang good year, a record year, really. The cattle numbers are at all-time low in over 60 years, and demand is really strong, even though prices are high. And so that's what's amazing, and that's what's driving the prices to just continue to go up.
When you say cattle numbers are low, are you talking like just domestic?
Domestic and worldwide. I think it's Brazil and New Zealand and some of those other countries they're down in their numbers too. And so they're saying that they're going to have a hard time in the world side of things being able to supply the demand to meet demand. And so for a little bit, for another year or two, they're predicting that prices are going to remain high. So we'll see if that holds true. I hope it does. I mean, coming from a rancher that makes my livelihood off of selling calves every fall, it's a fun thing to see. And it helps you kind of recoup and come out of the bad years. I mean, it wasn't just a couple of years ago you were feeding a cow more than what her calf brought, in the fall. And so I figured if I could hang on just a couple more years, ride it out, we'd see this high. And it's been a neat ride. So
one thing about a lot of the romanticism that happens around ranching is just like these rich cattle barons. Like those are the ones that get deified and, that people really praise in culture. But, you wait a lot of years to have a year like you had this last year.
And I've had a lot of people tell me it's these years that your ranches go out of business. And I says, what do you mean by that? And I says, well, it's because they make decisions in these good years that come back to haunt them in the bad years.
Really? So just like big improvements to their places and...
Yeah, increase your debt load because you can cash flow it at the time, And so that's like for me during these times, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of saying, how do I capitalize on this? But how do I set myself up for the future? Because the dip is going to come. Cycles are about every 10 years. And it's just shown them. I mean, it always happens. You can't always predict when the peak or the valley is going to come, but it does come. And so for me, it's all a matter of trying to prepare and make choices now that can help me ride through the next low.
So what are some of those moves that you're trying to make right now?
Well, I think it's being careful about debt load. Interest is all-time high, and you look at things and you're like, man, I can cash flow it now. I can go buy and do these improvements. But you have to realize that maybe this is the time you should be offloading debt and kind of being a little bit more free in your ability to make decisions later. So that's kind of the direction I'm headed. I don't know if it's the right way, but I'm trying to play it a little more conservative, I guess. I'm insuring my calves, my unborn calves, through the LRP program, which has been huge. And that helps me a little bit be able to mitigate some risk, I guess, for the dip. And so looking at the stock market where it hit the all-time high, I locked in my calves. I'll be able to sell them this fall at what the market is now. So if the market falls, which it has in the last 3-4 days since Trump came out with those tariffs, and China retaliated, everybody's afraid that the demand is going to shrink and we're going to have a bunch of beef that we're going to have to, find a home for because China's been a big importer of American beef. And so that's influenced, I think, some of the markets.
Well, and I think early, at least a lot of things that are coming out in the Wall Street Journal, there's a lot of fear around these Trump tariffs. And I think it could go a few different ways. I don't think a lot of people understand how much foreign goods that we buy, and that we're not really set up to take all manufacturing, right? So if you take semiconductors for an example, right? Semiconductors, the process of manufacturing those is highly technical. They go in our trucks, in our tractors, all that stuff, and the main producer of those is in Taiwan. And so I know Trump's tariffs are really geared more towards China, but he is going to have to be cognizant of, that process, the machines to make just one little part of those semiconductors are made in Germany, and they're $200 million, right? So there's all these like inputs that kind of come into things, and so it'll be interesting to see how the year shakes out. What are you seeing on cattle futures?
Everybody's saying that based on the heifer replacements that are being retained, the numbers indicate, I should say, the heifers on feed report that came out in January indicated that we still got at least another year before really we're going to see people start hanging on to their heifers and wanting to grow the cow herd. And with that, there's going to be a temporary, really decrease in available cow numbers because those heifers that have been on feed are no longer going to be available. So it's going to create another pinch on the supply temporarily, which that doesn't always correspond with the high price. So we'll see where that ends up. But from what I've read and all the different seminars I've observed and been a part of, they're saying at least this year we're good. Maybe even into next year is kind of what they're saying. But it's very dependent upon demand and how strong demand holds. If the American household can continue to sustain the high beef prices, which that's what people have been skeptical of, and that you look at the live cattle futures, they've been kind of hanging right at the $2 mark, and because a lot of people don't believe that we can sustain a higher price. And so we'll see what the peak ends up being, but we're getting close to it, I think, as far as where the price will be.
So your play right now, just to kind of reiterate this and drive it home, it's kind of like make hay while the sun shines, like get yourself in a better position to kind of survive the next 5-10 years, as opposed to, going and getting a new truck, going and buying a new tractor to help you farm and all that stuff.
That's what I feel like I need to do, is to mitigate risk, and starting out from scratch, I have to try and play my cards different and be more conservative. And
maybe just a quick call out there. So Landon's a first generation rancher. Landon did not inherit the land that he owns. He went to the oil fields, saved up for it for years. And he had to kind of go through the school of hard knocks to really learn the cattle market. And as a result of that, I think, your learnings have been maybe a little bit more intense and more accelerated because you've had to for survival.
Yeah. And there have been some tough times, some lean years when you're trying to figure out, how you can make ends meet and where you can pull money from other places. And we've been very blessed to be able to continue to operate, and that's something I feel grateful for. But we've had a lot of help from, my parents coming up and helping feed and do things. But man, starting out with a pickup truck, it was pretty daunting. And my wife still to this day, talks about how she had no clue how expensive ranching is. And, she used to drive by stacks of hay and was like, oh, that's just a stack of hay. Now she looks at it in money, and it's like,
she's like, that's $200,000.
$300,000, that's $500,000, and so it's just a different mindset. And when you're the one that has to fork out for it, and we've forgone a lot of things, our house isn't finished, and I built our house from scratch, and there's just a lot of things that we kind of have to play. We want to upgrade our vehicles, but we're going to ride them. Both rigs have 200,000, and that's what we're doing, is just trying to make them last.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, I think some great financial wisdom coming here for anybody interested in getting into the ranching deal. Let's talk a little bit about moving into, because you have a cow-calf program, and then you have a horse program.
Correct.
Talk to me a little bit about how you maybe offset the cattle with the horse program? Does that help out in lean years? Like, what are you seeing there?
I think it helped diversify me. It's just one of those deals where I didn't want to have all my eggs in one basket. And I love the horses. They're an integral part of the ranch. We use them. And so it became a thing that I was able to help bring some additional cash flow in the off seasons, I guess you could say. Because as a rancher, you get in essence one check a year. I mean, when you sell your calves, you got some cold cows you can sell. In the spring, if you have a cow lose a calf or whatever, you can take her to the sale barn. But, historically, you get one check a year as a rancher. And so with the draft program, I've been able to stagger some of that cash flow by breeding some outside mares and doing a few things that way. So it's been a huge help to us financially to be able to cash flow things. And I love using a good horse. So, the half drafts especially are great for big rides. They have their place. They're maybe not as athletic in a corral for cutting a cow, but, for all day just pounding the mountains and riding them, they hold up to it and they do good. So.
Well, and I think that's it's interesting as I go around to like different ranches that you can tell. And it's not just the ranch itself that uses a specific type of horse, but it's like the group of ranchers around, right? So if you head just a little bit further south of here, there's a lot of horses coming from Fort Ranch. There's a lot of horses coming from Clint Davis and Rasmussen's, and they're really going for kind of that 15-hand, do-it-all ranch horse that can sword in the gate, that you can rope on, all that stuff. But as you move a little bit further north up here in kind of the southwestern Wyoming, and you get, the valley here is at about 6,500 feet, and you'll see a lot of elevation on a horse in a day. And so that's why a lot of these guys here in Star Valley and, especially as you move north, are running those half drafts, because you can't keep coming back to the trailer. You can't come down the mountain to swap horses.
Half-day horse.
You can't afford to do that when you got a full day.
Yeah, and on top of that, you've got the foot structure of a horse and something with the metabolism, or they just seem to be able to maintain their weight better. Growing up
under stress
and constant work, that's in the outfitting with my dad. That's one of the things we saw. Those half drafts, they just maintain their condition better, and on the same ration. I mean, we fed them all in the corral together. They all got the grain together, but our straight quarter horses tend to fall off. They soar up, and so we just felt like the halves just hold up better for day in, day out riding.
Yeah, and I think that outfitting has really influenced how you breed your program.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I still, I try to find mares that are cut and bred. I mean, that's what a lot of my mares go back to. Yeah. The Peppy Sand Badgers, the Hollywood Dunnets, the littler, smaller quarter horse mares that have the smaller foot and the more athleticism. And then I cross them on my perch stud that seems to have a lot of cow to him. He's more, I would say, maybe your more modern hitchier type. He's a cross between that and the old style. But I think he crosses well because he makes a fairly athletic half with a good conformation, but still has a lot of leg and bone to him.
Yeah, and we'll include this in the comments section below. But if you want to reach out to Landon about some of the colts that he'll have for sale come fall, feel free to do that. Because in terms of half draft colts, they are pretty. They got pretty heads. They got good hips. They look good. So shout out to you there. I'm a guy that, just because I get to work at a couple different ranches throughout the year, I like a little of everything. Like in the fall this last year, I bought a daughter of the animal that I'm pretty excited about, and her mother is actually a heel horse that I think's won 25 or 30,000 in the World Series. So she's, but definitely more of a cutting horse. Mm-hmm. And then beginning of last year, I just realized I really wasn't that happy with my horse program, and I wanted, I'm going to say the D word here, some diversity. We're all about that equality around here. One of every color, we like that. But so I decided, I really, rather than targeting a horse that's specialized, I wanted, or rather kind of a generalist, I wanted to target horses that were more specialized. So, this year I went and got that Daughter of the Animal. I also picked up more of a ranch mare from Rasmussen Quarter Horses that I'm pretty excited about, a Bayronne mare. And one of the reasons I've been picking up mares is I can't afford to keep buying $10,000 babies. It's just, I know there's a lot of people that can do that. And I think the horse market this last year has just proven how resilient it is. But then I've got all the way up to my Frisian that I'm going to cross on, your big rig perch stud this year, because if you've pounded horses in the mountains on pack trips at all, those half drafts are invaluable. So I think a little of everything, actually, depending on what kind of country you're in, does matter.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you have to understand what your needs are and then work your program around that. And that's kind of what I've done. They're just a versatile horse that I can still, a half will still run down a cow. A lot of your cowboys that are in the rodeos as pickup guys, they like those half drafts. They've got the size to be able to drag a bull in. If they need to, they've got the athleticism to get up and get a cowboy off a bucking horse. And then they've got the size to be able to take a little more abuse. Yeah. And so I think everybody's got a preference, and that's what's kind of driven me to go the direction I have. So
what have you seen on prices in the half draft market this last year?
They're holding strong. I'm amazed. There's a really high demand. I've got people lined up for colts coming this fall that aren't even born yet.
And how many brood mares do you run?
I've got 20 head of brood mares.
Okay.
So
you'll have 15 to...
I should have. I've got at least 15 ultrasounded guaranteed, and I'm hoping I'll have a few more that I missed that I didn't get checked just because of late in the year, and I was trying to get up guiding and helping my dad bring cows off the mountain and just got busy.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's the hope. I had a guy, an old timer, tell me if you maintain 60% of your full crop every year or up to sell, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
And he says, I laughed at that at first, and he says, but as I've done it longer, I've realized that's reality. Raising colts, just sometimes you have good years and sometimes you don't. And, this last year I saw that. So I'm hoping we'll have 12 to 15 to sell, but you just never know.
So this is going back a little bit in our conversation, but do you feel like having a good horse program can help ranchers mitigate some of their risk against down years with cattle? Or do you think the horse market is pretty closely following the cattle market?
No, I honestly believe that they're two different markets.
Agreed.
I think you've got, people that love them for pleasure. You've got outfitters. You've got just a different clientele with the horse market than you do the beef market.
Yeah.
And the horse market has had its highs and lows. We're riding a high right now. And I think that everybody's been a little bit nervous if it can sustain. But I think there's been, I don't know if you want to call it a revival, but I think Yellowstone and some of the stuff that's kind of done to, romanticize, I guess, cowboy lifestyle has...
Make cowboys great again.
Yeah, has really driven a lot of people to want to come back to the roots that way and ride a horse.
Yeah.
But I think, there's something also therapeutic about horses too. And I think a lot of people find that it helps them.
Yeah.
To have something that they can go and do that de-stresses them. And horses are an amazing animal. And as you get I wish I could ride more. I love it. But I'm always so, torn with my time between farming and mechanic and everything else. But, for me, when I get out on a horse, nothing helps me de-stress more than just the gait and the rhythm of it's almost like a lullaby to me. It rocks me to sleep.
Yeah.
I love it. It just helps me de-stress. So I think that's what diversifies the market is you've got people that see that value and want it. And so, when you go to Logan, you've got people that have nothing to do with cows that are into horses and they like to go to the mountains. You've got the hunting world that there's a group of people that love them for that. And then you also have your team ropers and those guys. And the halves aren't necessarily going to fit that market, but, your quarter horses are going to, fall into the line with those guys. But that's why I felt like it's something that I enjoy doing anyway.
Yeah.
And I feed with a team in the winter. Typically, this year I haven't done very good, but it's something that I enjoy doing. So I might as well. It's kind of a hobby, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and it diversifies it.
Yeah.
So,
no, couldn't agree more. And I do wonder if how technological our world has become. I do wonder if that has prompted a little bit of this resurgence. People wanting to kind of get back to their roots. Like we get comments on the channel all the time. I have a day job. I actually work in technology. So I kind of have a foot in this world and a foot outside.
Right.
But I just like people, I get people all the time. They're like, I just dream about owning a horse. And I think there's a lot of people that are kind of chasing that too. So, and I say this again, I keep coming back to this, but I have been shocked at how resilient the horse market has been this year. Like I absolutely anticipated more of a crash. I agree. I still think we're riding kind of high. There's, depends on who you talk to in the horse world. Some people are saying it's going to maintain and keep going strong. And other people are saying it's going to start coming down. But I hauled a horse to Billings Livestock auction in June. I love Billings. Shout out to them, by the way. Jan Parker runs an absolutely incredible program up there. She, I hadn't sold a horse up there, and she was so nice. And she didn't have any idea who I am or anything like that. She was just treated me like family when I went up there. So it was a great place. I did not get maybe what I was hoping to get out of the dun horse that some of you guys have seen on that video. But like I say, I wanted to shift my program a little bit and put a little bit more money into the mares. But that sale in particular was a little bit softer in June, and that is one of their lower sales. Their big sales are February, September. I think they have a pretty big sale in April as well. But I think, I'm just looking at some numbers here. So in their November sale this year, let's see, 618 head went through that sale at about $24,000 for the high seller. And then the top 10 average of about 16. So, we're still talking some good numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. And from a ranching standpoint, I struggle riding a $20,000 horse just for fear you're running through and hit a badger hole and break a leg and you're done.
Yeah.
But you can see the value, for some people that aren't able to take a horse from the ground up and buy a horse that they can get on and ride and not worry about it.
Yeah. I think that's another area, like RMO horses I think they're out of Heber City or something. You see, they sell quite a few of those half drafts, and I think a lot of it is just because they're temperament, and they sell them as trail horses to, some of those folks in Park City and Jackson Hole and some of those nicer areas where they just need something that they can pull out of the corral that's not going to give them trouble and it's going to be a little quieter.
Yeah, and that's what we found with our drafts, especially with the outfitting world. A lot of things just don't bother them. They're just so cold-blooded that, we've had packs tip over, dudes tip over on the side and trying to ride the horse sideways, and they don't make it very long, but the horse kind of looks back at them and wondering what the heck's going on. And, some of your quarter horses, you do that too.
They're going to scatter.
They're going to get the heck out of there.
Yeah.
And so those drafts just tend, temperament-wise, just to be a little bit, kinder to the people that are a little more novice. And that's, I've seen some of the colts that I've sold over the last few years have gone to people that maybe this is a first-time horse for them. And they've been directed by other people that's the direction they should go to start because they can be a little more forgiving that way. Yeah.
I do think the quarter horse lines are moving towards kind of a colder-blooded, easier-going horse. Like I've noticed the last, 3 or 4 colts I've started. And I mean, this is a trend over years too, but like your Peppy Sand Badger bred stuff that was just hotter than hell. Like,
but they were tough.
And man, I've had a couple out of a horse called One Smart Peppy. Dan was one time soon. Just a really, really cool horse. Man, they were hard to start, but nobody was better mounted than you once you got them going.
And they'd go all day, and they'd give you everything they had, even if it wasn't a lot at the end. But they were tough.
But I do think less and less people, and I don't know. A lot of guys will say, people nowadays just aren't that cowboy, And I'm like, well, you also have to consider the time that goes into making these animals. And if you got one that you don't have to lope circles for 45 minutes to get going, that you can just get on and actually start training on, like that makes a huge, huge difference. And you get a lot further with less time.
Yeah. And time is something we all hear, we need more time. And I think that's maybe one of the driving forces too, is people are looking for an animal that they can get to places quicker with, so that they can perform the job that they need to do. And those other ones, they were good. But it took you 6, 7, 8 years on some of them, and it was a lot of riding.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a lot of guys that, still they were talking about having to warm the horse up because the bloodline, they just knew on a cold morning what they were going to get every time. And that horse could be dirty broke. Yeah. But they just had a little frog to him in the mornings.
That sorrel horse that I ride, he's 10 this year, and his dam's a Peppy Sand Badger. And he will still on a cold morning. You just got to watch him. And he's a watchy bugger anyways.
You'll get 2 inches under your pad on your saddle when you throw it on, and you're thinking, what am I going to get today?
Yeah. But then once you get him going, like you say, he's dirty tough. But, I think the modern quarter horse bloodline is going to keep shifting away from that hotter type. Because I think they've started to figure out, like, you could still get plenty of athleticism in a horse. It used to kind of be, guys used to say, if they're cowy, they're going to be a little hot and a little grabby. And for some horses, that was true. But I think our modern bloodlines on the quarter horse have kind of shifted away from that.
Well, you look at Metallic Cat, for example. Like, I hear across the board the calming effect that he can have.
No question.
Like those colts are easy to start. They've got good minds. They're cowy as all could be. I was looking at breed fees on him. He's $10,000 for a breed.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't tell you a little bit about, demand, that's people are wanting that. They want the athleticism. They want the cowiness, but they want the temperament as well to be just, I think, a little bit better.
I think the other thing, I think you're right. One of the really big shifts I think I've seen over the last 2, 3, 4 years with horses is that mares in a lot of these cells, like the 2-year-old cells, yearling cells, they're some of your high sellers. Like now that embryo transfers are becoming more widely available in every market, people are putting their money into mares as opposed to stud horses, which is a great move, honestly, because, at most, my experience has said that colts really mirror the dam a lot more than they do the stud horse. So I do think that is a really positive direction for modern bloodlines. Now, if we could get a little bit more foot, a little bit more bone on those quarter horses, it'd be a win.
Yeah. I was out in Ohio looking at some pretty high-end, more cut-and-bred animals, and man, they were little tiny buggers. And I thought, holy smoke. You'd wear those things out in a quarter day instead of, maybe that's where quarter horse came from, the quarter day. But I just kind of laughed because I thought, man, that's not what I'm used to.
Yeah.
But they were tiny, fine-boned, really petite.
Yeah.
But they're athletic, and they do what they need to do in the corral or in the arena.
Yeah.
And but they're not, typically your horses are getting rode day in, day out. Up mountains and gaining elevation and packing, a 250-pound guy with a saddle and everything else.
Well, I think you can get away with, doing a little range riding down in some of the flatter states on horses like that, where you're not really climbing. But like you say, when you start adding a little elevation and stuff, so it's so geography dependent, the type of horse that you should be looking at to buy. A lot of those horses in the show pen, they're never going to see the outside of an arena, and that doesn't, for guys like you and I, that's not really what we're looking for. My little animal filly, she's pretty petite, but I didn't get her to come be a ranch horse. I mean, she'll see some cows and stuff on smaller gathers, but she'll probably be kind of like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a place for them.
Yeah.
And there always will be.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got inner cities that are, showing interest in being able to do some of that stuff. And you got guys that are team roping and traveling. And, I think there will always be in demand, for a smaller horse. And so I think as the population grows, there's just going to be diversity within the breed, and you find what you need and kind of work through it. So,
Well, I think Yellowstone has really kind of captivated a lot of maybe your higher end buyers that kind of see that rancher's life as kind of the gentleman's life. I had a buddy at the Western Bloodstock this last year, and he said, and this would have been the NRCHA, not the December NCHA sale. But he said, you would have been blown away by the guys that pulled up in Bentleys and ostrich skin boots. That is just so far away from the world that I'm used to. But I think his main takeaway that he said was, I just can't believe the money that's here.
And that's what I think continues to drive the top end of the market.
Yeah.
Honestly, and that's I think there's going to be maybe a little softening on the bottom end of things. I don't think it can sustain. That's just my take. But I think there's always going to be a demand for a well-broke horse, and people will pay good money for it because there's just not a lot of people that have the skill set, nor the time, nor the facility and options of what it takes to make a good horse. They need to see a lot of different environments, have a lot of wet saddle blankets, and so there's people that are willing to pay for that. Once again, time, I think, being a driving force of that.
Yeah. There's a phrase that gets thrown around quite a bit that in the cowboy world, that the best way to make a horse is by having them see land and cattle. They see enough land and cattle, and that's how they get good. And I think there's a lot of different types of horses that can accelerate in those areas. Part of me buying a Friesian was I just wanted to experiment, like I just wanted to see, like, hey, if I take kind of this fancy bred, and I'd seen some going through some sales at Art of the Cowgirl, just bringing crazy numbers, 95, 100,000, like for these Friesians that, you could go, ride in a parade and they were fancy and pretty, but you're not going to run a cow down the fence. You're not going to take them to a show. And once you get a Friesian, trained to do ranch work, they're not going to win the Friesian shows either, but people are still paying them just because they're fancy and they're cool. And so it's just been, I agree. I think you're going to see a little bit more diversity in the buying market, like who's buying horses.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great thing for us and for Western culture.
I agree. And that's what, for me, I love to see the resurgence of people interested in our lifestyle. I love it myself, and I'm biased, obviously, because I grew up loving it. But I think it's important that people see where their meat and beef and that stuff comes from, and the energy that it takes to do that. And that it's not just a dumb rancher looking at cows and feeding animals, and there's a lot of things that you have to know, and that I think I have appreciated the fact that more people are interested in it, because I do think it's a necessity for society to see where their food comes from.
I think one of the things that Taylor Sheridan did well in the Yellowstone series is there's a couple of like interactions you'll see between different political groups that kind of have their eyes open to what the life of a rancher is really like, right? You learn, when you spend time with ranchers, because their livelihood depends on the ground that they live on, they got to take care of that ground. Like they got to be good stewards of the land that they're over. Just because they drive a diesel doesn't mean they hate the planet.
Right.
It's a necessity if you want to eat beef. If you want to have meat, like you got to have the tools to get that stuff done. And so I think, and all that is to say, I think Taylor Sheridan has actually done a pretty good job of managing those interactions and opening some people's eyes as to what, a real rancher looks. Not that John Dutton is a real rancher, but he has a lot of the ideas that are close in our hearts, I think. And
if anything else, it brings people to be interested to learn more about what it takes to be a rancher. And that to me is the most valuable thing, is that it's opening people's eyes to say, what is it about these ranchers in the West that wear a funny cowboy hat and, wear their gear? Is it generational, or is there something to it? And I think it's done good for the Western lifestyle.
Yeah.
So
I think one of the things that's kind of blown me away hanging out with you a little bit is like Landon knows a lot of depth about a lot of different things, right? Like fixing tractors and four-wheelers and side-by-sides and sleighs and building the house, from the ground up. And then also knowing, your cattle program and having to breed something that has better lung capacity for the elevation and all that stuff. Like it's just kind of opened my eyes as to how much a guy Landon, I think, is a true Renaissance man. Trying to make you blush here, but
I appreciate your vote of confidence, but I would say, that what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
And for me, that it's been necessity that's driven so much, and passion has driven so much of me to go out and learn. Because not always could I afford to pay somebody to come fix my tractor. Not always could I afford to, pay somebody to come and do some of the things that needed to be done. And so thankfully we live in the information age. And so I've been able to capitalize on that. And I love to learn. So, take it or leave it. I mean, I've had some people say, well, you're wasting too much time learning some of this other stuff. But what I found is the more I've learned, the more things tie together, and it helps me make better decisions down the road. And so I've looked at it as just a continuing education and improving who I am and the way I manage my ranch. And I'm hoping that maybe I can pass that on to my kids, that desire to learn, because I think that's critical for the human population to have that and to never lose it, to become complacent.
For sure.
And so anyway, that's my two bits there. So.
No, for sure. I think, and you start to realize how interconnected everything is economically too. Like, I mean, the decisions that are getting made overseas where our chips are coming from that are going to go inside our trucks and tractors and all that stuff. And, the steel that we're sourcing to, build anything and everything, it's just kind of crazy how interconnected everything is. And so I think you're right. By necessity, I think people's eyes have been opened to the fact, you're right, that ranchers are pretty sharp, and they have to be to survive.
You do.
Because ranching's about living operating loan to operating loan. It's not about just these huge paydays. First season of Yellowstone was funny because there was a helicopter that John Dutton has, and I think we don't have. I know the Galt Ranch up in Montana ran helicopters for a little while. I don't know if they still are, but yeah, that's not how stuff usually gets done.
Well, I think it's, for me, I find myself researching stuff that's not even associated to ranching, just like the trade deals and all the things that can influence my market. Because the more education I can have in regards to what's going on in the world, it can help me make decisions on when I keep replacement heifers, when I sell, or when it just helps me to become more educated. And I think it does the world good to be educated in all regards. I think no matter what your field is, it helps you to have appreciation for every side of the workforce. But from the ranching standpoint, that's where I try to make all my decisions educated. And so that requires a lot of research and a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so that's what I spend. And it's not, like I said, it's not ranching stuff I'm always researching. It's the trade deals and negotiations and some of the stuff that's going on within the government.
Yeah, I think, Lennon and I have talked a little bit about this off camera. I think one of the really interesting things in the coming years that's going to heavily influence ranching is, as the United States in particular, and again, I can really only speak to this because this is where we're based, right? I can't really speak to Australia or anywhere else.
Right.
And I think Canada is similar. But as the nation becomes wealthier and the price of land goes up, one thing that has been interesting over the last couple of years is maybe the lack of sensitivity from politicians, when it comes to passing that ranch down, putting taxes on that ranch that make you have to piece off ground to be able to afford the tax on that inherited property. And I just don't think people realize like how ranches are being broken down like that.
Right.
And so, there's a couple things that ranchers can do in response, right? You can figure out other sources of income, and that's where, social media, content creation, that stuff becomes more valuable. But I would really like to see politicians kind of figure out maybe that's not a good idea for us to tax these ranches as they get inherited.
Well, and that's the thing that it's hard because so many people look at these ranchers and they say, oh, they're rich. They're sitting on a gold mine. Well, that's only a gold mine if you sell it. And then you're out of a job.
Yeah.
Like you have nothing else. And so you're really an asset poor business.
Yeah.
Because, from a cash flow standpoint, you only make money if you sell what makes you a living.
Yeah.
And that's what's hard with the ranching side of things is it takes so much capital to get into it.
Yeah.
To buy the ground, to buy the equipment, to buy everything associated, and to really eke out such a meager return on investment. You've got to love the ranching lifestyle, and I think that's one of the things. Like after having been in the oil field and watching how cutthroat things were, money drove everything. And then as I started coming back and working with ranchers and buying hay and different things, leasing property, like money didn't matter. Like money wasn't the most important thing. And it was all about trying to be fair with people. And now obviously you're going to have some bad eggs in that mix that taint that view. But on a whole, I would say most guys are just salt of the earth, where money is not the most important thing to them. It's about helping their fellow human being. I got stuck in my big tractor and I had my neighbor come and he jerked me out with his big 315 horse tractor, and I offered to pay him. He's like, that's what neighbors are for. Like, I'm happy to come down and help you. And I thought, that's oftentimes, once again, time. When you get in the inner city, everybody wants to bill you for their time.
Yeah.
It's like, I worked an hour for you doing something. I need something in return. And that's the thing that I've loved about the ag community is it's more than just money.
See, and I actually think what you just described is actually really infiltrating horse culture. Like I think, people are becoming more and more cutthroat in just kind of that horse trading and selling world.
Yeah.
I think it's always been pretty competitive, but I think you're seeing that more. And I think that's what I also really appreciate about ranching too, because I see that as well. Like, one day you might see, somebody's ranch hand, working for them. Another day their boss might be sending them to work for another ranch, go to another branding or help with another gather. Like you'll see ranch hands going all over, different ranches. And so I appreciate that too. I think it's really cool to see. Well, Landon, this has been a good conversation.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up with our maybe concise thoughts on what the horse cattle market's going to do this year.
I'm the expert, so let me tell you. Far from. It's something like I don't know that anybody could really predict. And if they could, they'd be making a pile of money.
Yeah.
But based on all the indicators within the cattle world and everything, the cattle facts guys and all the different things that I've researched, we've got at least this year where the markets will be strong. They say it'd be a decent year to go buy cows, bred cows, because the return on investment will be there. Now, to do that maybe next year might be a little bit iffy. I got burned a couple years ago. It's been the last cattle cycle in 2015, 2016. Everybody said we got one more year. I went out and bought bred heifers, and within about a 3-month span, they fell $600 in value. I lost nearly $20,000 just on the little bunch that I bought.
Mm.
And so, for me, I would say if you're going to go buy bred cows, I'd do it this year, not next year. But that's just me. And so I would say at least one more year of good prices. And they say it's not going to fall off the edge of the earth, the prices, but hopefully it'll just slide, slowly down until it hits the bottom and we'll start back up again. But obviously no one has a crystal ball.
Yeah, nobody does have a crystal ball. On the horse market, I'm actually going to say that we're kind of mirroring that cattle market this year. Again, I think they're different markets. I think it's different economics, but I also think you're going to see the market as a whole kind of teeter on the higher end of things. But I do think we're kind of teetering on the edge of maybe a swell. I think next year might be a little bit riskier. Now, that being said, your high-end horses, your NCHA, your NRCHA, Western Bloodstock stuff, that's a different game. I don't know that will see a lot of impact there. I think you could continue to see those horses bring records. You're seeing Western Bloodstock horses, some of them going for, 800,000-900,000, sometimes over $1 million at that sale, which is so crazy to think about. But I don't know that you'll see a huge impact to that, or even your team roping horses. I think team roping horses will keep being strong because, that's a sport. That's kind of an everyman sport where if you put in the time and the practice, like if you're a number 4 header and you can catch 9 out of 10 times, you can win a check pretty frequently, right? And so you can justify spending money on a $20,000 to $30,000 horse if you can go, if it's a hobby and you can win 20, 30, 40,000 in a year. So, those areas, I think you're going to keep seeing about the same area that we've been at, maybe a little bit flat. I do think the bottom end horses might pick up just a little bit this year, but I do think we're teetering kind of on that edge. I think there's probably going to be a correction here within the next year or two.
And I think a lot of this is contingent upon the economy.
No question.
How much free cash people have in their pockets. And I think already when you read the studies, there's a lot of people living on credit card debt right now, and it's a growing number. And so, where's that going to change? And it's all dependent upon the policies that are put in place and how the economy responds to that. And I think that's going to determine a lot of where the future of these things go.
Yeah. And it'll be really interesting because like some of these tariffs, like a lot of it's your groceries, like stuff that's going to get more expensive. So that could potentially impact, people's free cash flow to go and buy a horse as well. So, I think there's a lot of unknowns this year, and it's crazy to think the economy is, it really follows like 7 companies, Google, Apple, NVIDIA for semiconductors. Like there's like 7 big companies that it follows, and those really could impact just about anything. But I'm with you. I think we're going to see a pretty decent year all the way around. Next year, who knows? We'll see.
It's always a gamble.
Yep.
That's why they call it ranching.
Yeah.
Maybe next year will be better.
Well, thanks for joining us, guys. Appreciate. It's always fun to sit down with Landon and get his thoughts. He's a guy I always like having on these shows, and again, you're going to start seeing more and more of him on the channel. So, thanks for tuning in. Happy riding, buying bred cows, whatever you're going to do this year. Adios.